Have you ever been in a room where one person is talking and they have everyone just completely captivated with a story, while someone else, maybe even you, presents perfect logical data and just gets blank stares? It is one of the most frustrating puzzles in communication. Today, we're not going to talk about tips or tricks. We are going to decode the fundamental physics of why the human mind is absolutely built to run on narrative. Now look, this sounds like a nice line of poetry, right? But for our purposes, we need to treat it like a law of communication physics. This single idea, really, it explains why facts so often fail to persuade, why emotion is literally the engine of our memory, and why the person who controls the narrative, well, they almost always control the outcome.
So the first signal we need to tune into is a really counterintuitive one, and it's this. Our brains are not optimized for raw data. We like to think of ourselves as logical beings, people who appreciate a well-reasoned argument. But the cold, hard reality is that the human brain is a story processor, not a logic processor.
To really get this, we can look at the work of Daniel Kahneman. He laid out this idea that we have two systems of thought. Now, we spend all our time, all our energy, preparing our presentations for what he calls System 2, the analyst. That's the slow, logical, skeptical part of the brain. But here's the thing. The real decision-maker, the one with its hand on the lever, is System 1, the believer. It's fast, it's intuitive, it's emotional. And it does not process spreadsheets. It processes story.
And this leads us to a really critical insight. When you lead with logic and data, you're basically activating the defenses of System 2. It immediately feels like pressure. It feels like an argument that has to be won or lost. But a story? A story is different. It just slips right past the guard at the gate. It invites the listener in, it suspends their disbelief, and it allows them to arrive at the conclusion all on their own. And that feels like a discovery, not a lecture.
Okay, so this isn't just some abstract theory. Let's look at the pattern. Because once you see this unfair narrative advantage, I promise you are going to see it everywhere that persuasion matters, from the boardroom all the way to the courtroom. Think about leadership for a second. A CEO can get up there and present a 50-slide deck packed with market analysis and 5-year projections, but it's just data. It's noise. It is the story of why we're doing this and where we're going and what this all means for us. That's what actually gets a team to move. The strategy is totally meaningless without the narrative.
Or take a look at sales. We all know this. The best product on paper doesn't always win, does it? Nope. The product with the most compelling story wins. Customers aren't buying a list of features, they are buying the story of a better version of themselves, a version that's more productive, more secure, more successful. The story is what creates the value.
And this is especially true in a high-stakes environment like the courtroom. A lawyer can present mountains of financial data, piles of evidence, but what does the jury actually remember? They remember the story. Was this a story of betrayal, of simple greed, of a tragic mistake? The side that builds the more believable, the more emotionally resonant narrative, they're the ones who control how every single piece of evidence gets interpreted.
So if the story is the mechanism, what's the actual game being played here? Let's dissect the mechanics. It really all comes down to controlling the emotional frame of the conversation. The core scientific principle at play here is something called affective salience. Now, it's a fancy term for a really simple and powerful idea. Emotional events get flagged by our brain as important, as something worth remembering. To put it simply, feeling is the glue that makes memory stick. Information that doesn't have an emotion attached to it is, to our brain, pretty much disposed. And what's really fascinating is how dramatically this chart visualizes the effect. Study after study shows that if you present information as just a list of facts, the recall after just 24 hours is abysmal. It's terrible. But when you take that exact same information and you weave it into a narrative, recall skyrockets. The story provides that emotional context, that glue, that encodes the data into our long-term memory. And this brings us to the real game. It's not about having the most facts. It's not about winning a logical debate. The game is about establishing the emotional context through your narrative. Because if you can control what your audience feels, you control what they pay attention to, you control what they remember, and ultimately, you control what they come to believe is true. So what's the cost? What happens to the smart, well-prepared professional who just ignores this fundamental law? The cost is falling into what I call the logic trap. That's where you just keep adding more information, more data, more slides, believing that's the problem.
You're in this trap if you're an expert and you're just wondering, why isn't my flawless data making an impact? And the answer is pretty simple, because data has no inherent meaning. It's just noise until you place it inside a narrative frame that tells people why on earth it should matter to them.
You're definitely in the trap if you're a leader and your brilliant strategy just isn't landing. See, without an official story to explain the why, your team will just invent their own. And I can guarantee you, their story is almost certainly not the one you want them to believe.
And at its heart, this is the ultimate cost. Conversations don't fail because of a lack of information. They fail because we miss the real game being played. The game is not data transfer, it's meaning construction. And if you're not moving people, it's because you haven't given them a story to hold on to.
Understanding this game, this is what separates good communicators from the truly elite ones. So let's analyze the edge they have. How do they think differently?
And this slide illustrates the mental shift perfectly. See, most of us operate as a presenter of information. Our main focus is just transferring data. Our goal is clarity, and our tool is facts. But elite communicators, they see themselves as architects of meaning. Their focus isn't transferring data, it's building belief. Their goal isn't just clarity, it's emotional resonance. And their primary tool isn't facts, it's narrative.
So please understand, their advantage isn't that they have a collection of better speaking tips. It is a fundamentally different operating system. They know deep down that their job isn't to deliver information. Their job is to frame that information within a story that gives it purpose, that makes it memorable, and that drives people to a new understanding or a new action. So let's make this practical. Let's turn this entire framework into a diagnostic tool that you can apply right away. Here are 3 simple questions to audit your own communication, starting with your very next conversation.
First, ask yourself, what story am I telling? And be honest with yourself here. You are always telling a story, whether you mean to or not. Is it a story of complexity and confusion, or is it a story of clarity and confidence? Because if you don't intentionally define the narrative, your audience will define it for you.
Second, what feeling remains after you're done speaking? Honestly, this might be the most important thing. Do people feel inspired, anxious, confident, confused? That emotional residue, that is your real message. That's what they will carry with them long after they've forgotten your specific words.
And finally, the most important question of them all, what does this all mean to them? The huge shift from being a presenter to becoming an architect of meaning, it happens when you stop focusing on what you want to say and you start obsessing over what you want your audience to conclude. Because in the end, the only thing that really matters is the story they tell themselves after you're done talking.